Welcome, citizens of Gotham, to The Fire Rises, a Batman podcast focusing on all things The Dark Knight and the DC Universe. If you'd like to connect with the show, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, X, Threads, and Bluesky. Just search for us, that's tfrbatpod. And if you have thoughts, questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes of the show, you can reach us by email. Just send those emails to tfrbatpod@gmail.com. Now, my name is Eric Carter, and I am your host, and today I am not joined by Joe Fornerato. Today I am flying solo, but I will not be alone on the entire episode because we do have a very special guest. We had an interview that was conducted just a few hours ago as I record this, so we're going to get to that in just a moment. Of course, if you see the title of the episode, you know we're talking to DG Chichester, longtime Daredevil writer of the crossover Daredevil and Batman, Eye for an Eye. So, we're going to talk a lot to Mr. Chichester, but before we get there, do want to let you guys know about our partner sponsor, Organic Priced Books. Organic Priced Books is a small business dedicated to saving you money on the collected editions of comics that you love. Whether that be from Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, IDW, Boom Studios, Image, you name it, Organic Priced Books has it, including the epic collections from DG Chichester himself. So if you're looking to pick up those epic collections, catch up on some Chichester work, go down to the link in the description of this podcast and use our link to go to Organic Priced Books, and then use our promo codes. The first, tfrbatpod, will save you $2 off of any order, and the second, tfrbatpod, ship it together, will save you 5% off of any order of 3 or more books. So go down there and use that link today and support us as you save money. But without further ado, let's get into it. I met Mr. Chichester at GalaxyCon Richmond. He was so welcoming, he was so kind, and he agreed to give us some time here on TFR. So here it is, our interview with Mr. DG Chichester. All right, so we do have Mr. DG Chichester. He has given me permission to call him Dan. That's right, Dan. Correct?
Please. Yes, so much less stress doing it that way. Yes, for me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate you taking the time to give us just a few minutes to chat. And I wanted to say, you and I met a few weeks ago at GalaxyCon in Richmond, Virginia.
Yeah, terrific.
And I just wanted you to know, you are by far the most gracious and welcoming person that I've ever talked to at a con from
Really?
that side of the table.
Oh,
Absolutely.
wow. That was very kind of you. That's great.
Yeah, you actually edged out Alan Richson.
Oh,
He was the
whoa.
best. Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
previously he was the best conversation I had had. He actually took a lot of time with me, which I was surprised at the moment.
uh-huh.
But yeah, I mean, you you were very kind and very giving with your time, so I really appreciate that.
Well, that's really good to hear. I think I learned from the best. I learned watching Clive Barker when I used to work with him at conventions, and that guy was, he would give every second of time to people, never, disengage from them. Didn't matter how long that line was. He was there, to the end. And I just watched how he tracked and appreciated, people. So I try to do the same.
And it's very much appreciated. And it's funny that I knew you were coming. You were one of the main reasons that I actually went to the con this year. I wasn't planning on going, but
Very
after
cool.
I had the episode with Ryan Lauer
Hmm.
talking on the Batman Book Club, talking about your
Yep.
book, Daredevil and
Yep.
Batman. You were the very next guest on the show talking
Yes.
about that book again. And then I saw you were coming to GalaxyCon and I was like, well, this is Kismet. I can't miss this opportunity. So
There you go. It's the Batman Daredevil who so few people know about sometimes, but now he's been the gift that keeps on giving over the last month or so. So he's good.
that's amazing. That was actually one of the first questions I wanted to ask you, Dan, because when I handed you my copy of the book to sign,
Yep. Right.
at GalaxyCon, and you surprised me. You said that's one that you don't get often, or you don't see it often at cons, or asked to have it signed. Why is that, do you think? And what is your most common, I guess, book or whatever you were asked to sign?
Sure, sure. I mean, as you saw on my table, being a writer, you don't know what you're going to like engage with people on. So, I make some little prints that people might want to get autographed if they don't have a comic. And I always
Mhm.
have the Batman Daredevil one because it is a nice, striking cover that Scott McDaniel did. But I would say 7 times out of 10, the reaction of people is, I didn't even know there was a Batman Daredevil comic, like any of
Mm.
them, let alone, mine. So why that is, I don't know. I mean, I think because we are kind of so far out of the window. Now we're coming back into the window of there being company crossovers. At that point
Yes.
in time, those were more well known, or they happened more frequently, you might say. But certainly for many years, they didn't happen at all. So I think a lot of people just never even anticipated that there could be something like that. And they certainly never saw that one because that book is what now, like close to 30 years, 30 years old. So maybe,
I think we're
right?
2 years
25,
away,
30.
97, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah,
Yeah.
God help me. But so so I think it just doesn't get on folks' radar, and there wasn't, it wasn't collected, or if it was, probably one of those giant omnibuses that are tough to afford. I think it has
Mm.
been collected again in one of those giant omnibuses that are tough to afford. So uh, people just don't know about it, but as they get a chance to see it, then I usually send them on a hunt. I say, tell them about the story a little bit, go out, track it down. Um, Probably the thing I see most frequently is Daredevil 300, which would have been the end of the Last Rites storyline, the fall of the Kingpin. That was sort of in mob speak, kind of where I made my bones. Uh, you know,
Absolutely.
so that one shows up, probably pretty frequently, and I'm happy to have that be the one.
Nice. Well, and I just actually finished reading the Epic Collection Last
Yeah.
Rites,
Hmm.
where Ann Nocenti goes into your run and then your run with Last Rites, which I think is a very underrated Daredevil story, by the way. And just coming off of Born Again, the TV series,
Hmm.
with not exactly the same story or anything like that, but there's just so much that I see in your run when I read it that it feels so familiar, and maybe it's just Daredevil overall.
Hmm.
But with Daredevil and Kingpin and that dynamic, and you've got why am I blanking?
Bullseye,
You've got
Karen,
Bullseye in
Foggy,
there. You've
all
got
the good
Karen.
ones.
Yeah. So you've got those so integral to the show. And while I'm reading your run over the last few weeks, it's like, well, it feels like I'm watching an extension of the show.
Well, that's
Um,
that's good to hear. I will say
yeah.
though, it's and all credit to those folks. I think they are phenomenal performers. I think
Mhm.
everybody is the character, which is wonderful. Um, but I just actually did a Last Rites podcast, about a week ago, and somebody wanted to talk about that specifically. We kind of did he called it a creator commentary, So
Mm.
he actually wanted to walk through the book, almost page by page. And I don't think they did as good a job with this show as they did with the original Netflix ones. I think the
With Born
performances are
Again.
spot on. Yeah, I think I cannot fault the characters, and there are just so many moments where things, hit well. But I think there are also lots of moments where it just doesn't connect, like in terms of, you know, TV, and TV like sort of a synergy. You mentioned
Mm.
Alan Rickman, it's I just watched the last episode of the third season of Reacher, and that show delivers on every level.
It
So
does.
I just feel that uh, I'll compare Last Rites to this Born Again, not Frank Miller's Born Again, per se. And I'll say the story is actually a little stronger.
I wouldn't disagree with that. I will say, I mean, I do know to give that show its credit, I do know that they had to do a lot of reshooting and
Very much
retooling.
so.
So,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
think you can feel that at times. I do still think it was good, but I would agree with you. I think the original run on Netflix was stronger.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
oddly enough, I mean, and hopefully hopefully it is that case of what you just said, that
yeah,
they couldn't scrap everything they had done. They had to take some of the troubled production, retool it, add it to some new stuff. And again, there's nothing, I can't fault it in the sense of like, oh, don't watch that. It's just simply that it just doesn't mesh. So it's a very competent program, but it never got me excited. I never had that, oh, I got to watch this.
I
Whereas,
understand that.
that feeling, that feeling, Andor is coming out tomorrow. And,
Yes.
I'm on I got to watch that list with that right away. So,
Yeah, that first season was phenomenal. So I'm definitely
mhm,
looking forward to the
totally.
next one. So let me ask you, because this is
Please.
something the first time that anyone's on our show, and I know you're the Marvel guy. You wrote Daredevil for so long, but you did have a crossover with Batman.
Yeah.
So one of the first questions I ask someone when they're on this show is kind of their history and connection with the character of Batman. So
Hmm.
outside of writing the comic specifically, I guess before you got into comics when you were growing up, before you were in
Hmm.
the industry, what was your history with Batman? Did you grow up reading the books, or how did that start?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of people, I think Batman was probably one of my favorite characters. I don't know if he was my favorite character, but I was very much a DC guy, or DC boy, growing up. And maybe it was the initials. Yeah, But Flash, Green Lantern was a huge favorite. I love Kurt Swan's Superman. And Batman, especially as done by Mike Grell, Jim Aparo, these are some of the artists that I before I knew who they were, I recognized their style. And Steve Englehart, Marshall Rogers, these were
Mm,
amazing stories for me that imprinted themselves on me. I finally had a chance to meet Steve Englehart a couple years ago, and at a convention at a GalaxyCon, and I was actually starstruck a little bit. I was sitting right next to him and said, "What? You're Steve Englehart?" And then it all kind of came flooding back. All this rush. So Brave and the Bold, was I always thought was a great. Um, like I like the variety of Batman in that day. I think as much as anything else, I like that. While I think a lot of us these days now think of Batman more in the aftermath of and aftermath sounds bad, but of the Dark Knight and such, where things maybe took a much darker turn altogether.
mm,
Um, I did appreciate growing up that diversity of Batman, where he could be in a team up in the Brave and the Bold with almost anybody and still work. I loved him in the Justice League. I loved him when he was doing his standalone stories, and it would be a story by, Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. So I felt there was lots of Batman influences, and I loved, frankly, the Adam West TV show. I mean, that was younger, but that was probably my first instance of like, if I'm really going to think back, which you've got me doing, that's my first instance of Batman, right? It's really that show and not realizing it was over the top. When you're a little kid, you just think it's like, let's look at the gadgets, look at the cool costumes. It's Batman. The villains are outrageous. Uh, everything about it feels straight until you hit that certain point where you're like, wait a minute, he's got a mustache. You know.
that's actually refreshing to hear because you hear guys like Mark Hamill, who says, the first time he saw Batman from 1966, he was like, "Wait a minute, they're not taking this seriously." And
Hmm.
I wonder sometimes, how genuine that is because you hear so many people that for the first time encountered Batman 66, and it wasn't, this is a joke. It was that's Batman on the screen.
Right.
So,
And certainly there are people who in the other direction, right? They knew it
mhm.
was what they were doing. Uh, and certainly I think that's part of what made it popular. But for me, it wasn't. It was like, this is just cool. And
Nice. Well, so I know that you did again. you did write the crossover, but I know
Hmm.
that you had left the Daredevil book when you got the crossover. So,
Well, go ahead. Let me let you finish.
okay. So I was kind of curious. You had either parted ways with the book or they had replaced you with another writer or however that went down.
Hmm.
How was the decision made to bring you on to do Daredevil and Batman now that you weren't on that title anymore? And you can expand if you were going to on why you weren't there anymore.
Yeah, no, and this is a very good question. Especially with a title that is not as well known and it sort of seems, a little like where to come from and such. When we did a storyline in Daredevil, and I know this is not a Daredevil show, but but yeah, there's horns in the background, so I'm free
That's
to
right.
talk about it a little bit. Um, we had done a storyline called Fall from Grace, me and Scott McDaniel, and Fall from Grace is a bit of a kitchen sink story. There's a lot of stuff happening in it, a lot of stuff I like. There's a lot of stuff I wish I could go back and fix. But one of the things it did do was boost a lot of attention on Daredevil, which was what we intended it to do. And we had this moment in time, myself, Ralph Macchio, who was the editor, Pat Garrahy, who was the assistant editor, we all had a good relationship. We said, now the Orient is hot, let's strike it. And so we actually put a lot of Daredevil things into motion. We put an Elektra miniseries into motion, which would get done. There was a time travel Daredevil story. There was supposed to be a Daredevil, call it year two, sort of story.
Mm.
And there was this Batman Daredevil crossover, that we had put forward. Everyone approved it. DC approved it. Denny O'Neil was on board. Um, and so all these things were happening concurrently to try to almost create this little pocket Daredevil universe, if you will, within Marvel. And then what did happen was um, Marvel had a bit of a shakeup internally, and Daredevil was reassigned from Ralph's office, where it had been forever, to Bobby Chase's office. And Bobby's scheme was to recreate Daredevil as what do they call them? Marvel Knights, I think, maybe, or no, or anyway, they created like a sort of a street level heroes thing. It was Daredevil, it was the Punisher, it was a couple other, street level characters. But in doing so, Bobby apparently did not like what I was doing to the point she took me off the book, without even really telling me, but we won't go down that weird breakdown in professionalism. But
It
but I was
there's something about it on Wikipedia. I'll let you be the judge if it's true or not, but
gotcha,
we'll go
gotcha.
with that.
But we'll go with that. But all those projects died, right? Right away, like, the time travel story, which was with Paul Ryan, all these things kind of went away. Yeah, but for some reason, and maybe it was because of his relationship with Denny, because Ralph and Denny were friends. Ralph had been Denny's assistant at one point. Um, Ralph was able to maintain control of the Daredevil Batman crossover. Like he was able to hold on to that
Mm.
in his office. So we maintained a sort of if you picture like a medical monitor, in a hospital, something's in a coma, but every now and again there's this little like, beep, beep kind of going on. So it went from a fast track thing to, is this thing still alive? And in the course of it, we actually lost the original artist, who was supposed to be Lee Weeks, who I had done Last Rites, with. And
Hmm.
so Lee had originally been part of the project and part of the story, but it extended out so long and conditions changed. Lee resigned from the project, and it just seemed like it was never going to happen. I mean, I was trying to make it happen uh, because it would be good for me as much as anything else. Um, but that's why there's that gap, and it seems like I'm coming back to the character, of
Hmm.
Daredevil after I had seemingly long left it, is because it just took a while for that pocket universe, even that Ralph was able to keep that alive in, to suddenly get it reactivated and allow it to happen. And this was more on, this was on Marvel's end. DC acted very rapidly, once the project was in motion.
Very nice. Well, yeah, that's it's kind of. some parts, like I said, are kind of online out there in the mythos about what may have happened or may not. But it's
Right.
nice to get more from the source of
Yes.
what's kind of going on. Um, so that I know you did Batman and Daredevil, and then what was your career trajectory following that? After the crossover, where did you go?
I think I was working the Wendy's fryer for a while. No, comics became a difficult proposition, for a lot of people.
Hmm.
Big parts of the industry had collapsed. Marvel had a lot of layoffs. There had been a lot of store closures, less stores, less need for comics. It's a game, it's dominoes, right? Falling over. There's less titles, there's less opportunities. Um, so for me it was very hit or miss. I would try to get some things going. I would get some independent stuff. There were some Dark Horse titles I had done
Hmm.
as part of their universe. There was a company that was doing they were doing comics almost to then use the comics to pitch as movies. So they didn't really ever care that they whether they were good comics or not. They just wanted to create something as a comic and then take that movie studio and get them kind of jazzed up and interested. So I did some things for them to try to get things going. There was uh, I was called, me and Lee were called by an editor named Tim Toohey, who was doing the last issue of Daredevil Volume 1, which would be 380. And
Yes.
up to that point, Daredevil was sort of like in a lame duck status. They knew that Joe Quesada, Jimmy Palmiotti, Kevin Smith were coming on the book to relaunch it in a form. So nobody was really paying much attention to it, and the stories had gone downhill. And Tim had been given, carry the book over the finish line so these other guys can pick it up. But because he didn't like what was going on, he actually called us and said, "Can you do one last good story that sort of jazzes it up?" Which was very, flattering, that he would do something like that. And so that was, a one-shot sort of thing. But I for some reason or another, like around that time, a door had started to open into advertising, which is something I wasn't really aware of or had been trying to get into, but it was opening up, and it was something I was then able to step through and make a career out of. But also around that exact time would be the only second time I'd get involved with the Batman universe, which was that Joe Illidge, who I'd worked with at Milestone, had become
Hmm.
one of the Batman assistant editors at that point. I think he would later become a full editor in the Batman world. But he had offered me a Huntress story, in a Batman annual, so which was a lot of fun to work on. But and I probably could have, in retrospect, parlayed that into something else, or at least tried to. But I was way too black and white in those days, Eric. I was like,
I
if I
gotcha.
if I'm doing this, I can't be doing that, which was absolutely asinine, attitude to have, and probably cut me off for some opportunities. But on the other hand, I was able to build up credibility in a different area and improve my skills. So nowadays I can come back and do some comics, and I think I'm a better, more disciplined writer because of that.
And that makes a lot of sense because if you look at your kind of your bibliography, there's a huge gap in the
Oh
middle
yeah,
there. And so, I mean, hearing that and explaining where your career trajectory went, that makes sense. But then, I mean, one of the biggest pieces, I mean, Daredevil Black Armor.
sure, sure.
So that, I mean, that was years and years after the end of your Daredevil run and Daredevil 380.
Yep.
So how did Daredevil and that 2023 was the start
Um,
of Black
yeah,
Armor?
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's when it came out. That's when the first issue came out. Yep.
Okay, so and that's relatively recent,
Yeah.
2 years ago. So after all this time, how does that conversation start? What brings you back to Marvel to do another Daredevil story that exists within the time frame of your original Daredevil work?
Yes, yes, and that's that's credit to Marvel, and that's credit to CB Cebulski, the editor in chief at Marvel. And so I had gone to one of the first comic conventions I'd gone to in 20 odd years. I mean, when I drop, guess when I do something, I guess I do it all the way. Like um, and so I had really dropped out of the scene. And I'm not going to say in fairness to myself, but there was a certain quantity of like, woe is me, right? At a certain point in my headspace. So, you don't want me, I don't want you. Sort of stepped away from, the industry, stayed in touch with people, but, not so
Mhm.
much what was going on or going to conventions. But I had been invited to a Terrificon, which is a great convention in the Connecticut area where I live, and it's a really great show. And I'd been invited to go there, and I had a table, and much as you saw me,
In
not
Richmond,
too
yeah.
different, and Richmond. And this guy comes up to me and he's like, and I'm, hey, I'm CB Cebulski, and yeah, I'm a little slow, not enough caffeine that day. Man, that name sounds familiar. Oh, you're CB Cebulski, and he was very complimentary. He said, he loved, my work, and Last Rites, Fall from Grace. Um, and thank you very much. And would you ever consider coming back and doing something else? And I think right before he said that, I had laughingly said, "Oh, did you get those pictures I sent you?" you know, and he just sort of said, as a matter of fact, and then he kind of segued into a real like conversation about actually doing something because Marvel has had some success, I guess, doing what they were calling nostalgia books. They would bring
Hmm.
back a creator from back in the day, often a writer, and pick up not just on their talent, but also kind of put them back in the space where they were playing. So obviously we're not going to do the real 90s where I did Fall from Grace and that Black Armor existed, but the Marvel version of it. So, you know, weird timey-wimey, sort of stuff.
Sure.
So that was something, they put out there. I said, let's talk, let's figure out what we can do. He put me right in touch with Devin Lewis, who was the editor on Daredevil. So there was no real delay on their part. And we just started talking about, well, at that point, I didn't know it was the Black Armor that they wanted to use. I figured it was
Hmm.
going to be Daredevil. Obviously, that's the thing I'm most well known for, so it makes sense. But when Devin said, "Well, we want you to do a story with the armor," I cracked up. I laughed out loud. Because Scott and I took a lot of. Can I swear on your show?
Absolutely. Yeah.
You
Yeah. Go
know,
for it.
you know, we took a lot of fucking shit for that armor. Um, and because a lot of people were like, "How dare you get rid of the red costume? Daredevil doesn't need reinforcements. He's always going to be able to avoid this. Credit to the first Netflix show that they actually saw the same thing we did. Sometimes this guy needs a little bit of reinforcement, in what he's
Hmm.
wearing. And so when Devin said that, it was the last thing I expected that they would want to go back to that particular time with that particular suit. But we had some good conversations. I had some inspiration very quickly, gave them an outline for what I thought could be a good story. They gave back some really good notes, and we were pretty much off to the races, relatively quickly in terms of me starting to then turn that into, plots and such. And then of course Netho Diaz would get involved, and the whole thing, got elevated many levels up.
Well, I'm really glad that it happened because Black
Me
Armor
too.
is a really fun story, and I
Thank you.
greatly enjoy it.
Yeah.
Um, and we were talking about the TV show. I don't know if you've seen or not, but there have been set photos from the second season of Born Again floating around of
Right.
Charlie Cox in a black costume.
Right. Right.
So so I don't know where there's been a few instances of Daredevil wearing black in the comics.
Yep,
But
the Shadowland stories. Yep. Yep.
Shadowland, things like that. But what Black Armor and the Black Armor issues of your original run kind of popped into my head when I saw it. So
Hey, if it would be nice to high five the screen if it happens. I mean, it could be any
Yeah.
number of things. It could have nothing to do with it at all. I think that three things kind of happened in succession, which Hasbro came out with a killer toy, about
Yes.
a year and a half, 2 years before the Black Armor comic series, and that was, I think, redeemed the suit in a lot of people's minds because it really is a killer toy, and it really sort of
Mhm.
shows off the look of the thing. And then I think, as you said, the Black Armor series was fun, is fun. I'm really proud of what I did on it. I'm thrilled to have worked with Netho. And I think it delivers exactly on what we did, which was to say, I wasn't looking for advice from Fabian Nicieza, but Fabian is never shy about giving advice. And I love Fabian. So, but we were out to lunch and he was, I'd said, hey, this thing might be happening. And he said, you know what, write it, because he'd done some of these nostalgia series. And he said
Mm.
the best thing is write it like you never stopped writing it. Don't
Mm.
don't go, second guessing yourself or whatever else. Just write it as you've never stopped writing the book. And so in my mind, I and I would have gotten there, I think, on my own anyway, but it was a good lead to just say there were lots of stories that happened with this Black Armor. We just haven't seen them. So in between
Mm.
the time, Scott and I introduced it and I got removed from the title, there were only a handful of stories, that really took advantage of that costume. But in my mind's eye, it suddenly became, no, there's lots of stories, lots and lots and lots of stories. And now we get to tell one of them, for an audience. And so I think that was a very freeing attitude to sort of approach it with and let me sort of exercise a lot of things. And then, coming out of that, apparently they have in the regular Daredevil book, and I haven't read the story yet, but they brought it back now for a current day story. So I
Mm.
think it's had the, as long as they didn't shit all over it in the story,
Right.
um, then it's really had kind of its redemption arc, so he doesn't need it every issue, but he could pull it back out of the Daredevil cave or whatever, on a semi-regular basis when he needs it.
Well, I can't confirm or deny that that's the case because as most people, I'm behind on my reading.
Right.
But I look forward to seeing it in the current run because that's fun.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about with the nostalgia, I mean, that is something that definitely works for a lot of these big characters. I mean, you look at Batman right now. We've
Mm-hmm.
got the last Halloween that's
Yep.
going on. You've got Hush that's just been
Yes.
reintroduced with Jim Lee and Jeff Loeb. So it's definitely a thing. And this, I mean, with Black Armor being very recent, that absolutely tracks because it seems like it's just happening a lot recently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think if you approach a story like that, with a character that you enjoy, which I do,
Hmm.
and you sort of unfetter yourself from your own past. Like I had to solve a lot of problems uh, that I had sort of I had backed certain things into a corner in Daredevil's world at that point, thinking I was going to be writing the story and I would get them out. But I had to go back in and now solve the problems now in just 4 issues, in a 4 issue miniseries. But I
Mm.
wasn't having to, um, I was just able to have fun with it, I guess is my point. I wasn't having to overthink it, worry about the next issue after it was done. And for my own self, I just feel that made the story much more freeing and much more interesting and opened up a lot of uh, themes and doors, that I hadn't really anticipated. And Netho, was just a great partner. They gave us sort of the gift of I had written a very, very, very complete plot,
Hmm.
as notes to exchange with the editors and, saying this is what we're going to do. But I had fully anticipated that I was going to have to then turn that into a full script, page one, panel one, script, panel two, script, etc., which is the way a lot of modern day comics are now written. Um,
Sure.
But what they did is they just took the plot I'd written and sent it to Netho, which I didn't know, and which is what the way we would have worked back in the day, right? I would have written a plot, the artist would have illustrated it, would come back to me and scripting it, and so forth. So not only was it a retro series, it actually got done in a very retro way, which jazzed Netho up. He felt that was very freeing for him, and for me, it became a very organic, process. And I love seeing what an artist does with with the story in that way, and will often
Mm.
surprise me in a good way to then want to write the dialogue and the captions and such more based on what they've done than just what I said I've seen in my head.
That's interesting. So I know that you've got, and we'll talk about your current works
Sure.
that you have going on right now in a little bit, but you have, I mean, you have some current books that you're working on now. Is that the method that you're using now? Do you still use the old school plot outline method, or do you do the more current scripting with your new work?
With the newer work, I mean, I like to go where people want to go.
Hmm.
So in the case of some of this newer work, the publishers or the artists did want a full script. They did
Hmm.
want page one, panel one, description. Here's the dialogue, and such. Panel two, repeat, repeat, repeat. Um, So I always found as an editor and then as a writer, follow your artist, right? You want to keep them inspired and energized. So if that's easier for uh, the other talent you're collaborating with, I'm okay doing that. But if I
Mm.
had my druthers, I would still want to, work the other way. I think it's just by and large works out in a more energetic way.
Yeah, that's fascinating because I guess I'm so used to, especially with the collected editions now that you get a lot of times you'll get those special features in the back of the book.
Yeah.
I think of like Scott Snyder's books a lot.
Yeah, totally.
You'll see like it looks like a movie script at the back of
Totally.
the book.
Yep.
And it's
Yep.
I guess that's just how my mind is programmed to think of a comic book writer.
Hmm.
I had never considered the wider, plot outline
Yeah.
method. And I guess that's, I guess it would depend on what your artist is used to. Like if they were from that older day of comic books, they probably would have no issue with it. But your more modern artists might not know what to do with that.
Well, that's why I was anticipating doing this as a script. And you called it a plot outline. I would call it just at least what I do, strictly a plot. I do a lot
Apply.
of
Okay.
detail, and even though it'll say, page 5 to 11, or whatever, or page, 11 to 13. It might be a short gap, it might be a longer gap, or a range of pages rather. I'll put a lot of detail in,
Mhm.
and so even though I've written like short paragraphs, my short paragraphs I'm seeing in my mind's eye, um, those as panels, even though I'm not writing them as panels. I'm trying to break up the visuals in my head so that I could see it better. Um, and in the case of like Netho, or any artist I worked with in that style, then they interpret it, and I may have thought of something. I mean, I can think of some sequences in Black Armor where I had sort of broken it down in my head as, well, this is going to be 6 panels, right?
Mhm.
That's how I broke it down. But then Netho, because he's a little bit of a beast, it's, no, I'm going to make it 9 panels, or whatever, and so that's that's better for him. He gets to run with that, or I'll just use little my actually Daredevil like action figure, work out a fight scene, and try to describe, well, how's he flying at Sabretooth and, Green Goblin and, flipping over them and this kind of thing. And how am I going to describe this?
I love
But
that.
yeah, but that's I like to make sure the detail is there, so that the artist has, what he or she needs, to work with.
Well, since you said that, I've got a follow-up question that'll lead into my next question then.
Sure, go for it.
You're mentioning your plots. Have you kept your plots from all of your work? Do you still have copies of those?
Man, you're gonna make me cry, Eric. And kids, let's make sure you follow Uncle Danny's advice. I had a hard drive crash in 2001, and I
Oh
lost
no.
everything except oddly enough for the plot to that Daredevil 380, a full script from a Judge Dredd issue, and two plots from a crazy mercenary boogeyman book I wrote called Terror Incorporated. But everything else in terms of like the original work
Hmm.
was lost, from that hard drive. And I didn't have a backup, so now I have three hard drives plus the cloud running
Mm.
simultaneously to back
Well,
up, back up, back up. So I wish I
I'm
did.
sorry to hear that. Would Marvel have that stuff or
No, I mean, so
no?
long after the fact. I mean, it's, typically once from an editorial point of view, even when I was an editor, once you get past the issue, you clean out that file. You might have
Mm.
five issues running simultaneously in different levels of completion, but once that thing's gone to publication, you clean out that folder, a physical folder in those days, and then move on. So, and there was so much turnover, and the offices moved between so many different places. There'd be nothing, available in that way. And I've never asked. Lee might have some of them, perhaps,
Mm.
but I can't imagine, why he would have kept it,
God, oh
so many
yeah.
years later.
Well, and the reason I asked that leading into this one, Ann Nocenti just got an omnibus of her Daredevil
Hmm.
run.
Yeah, right. Hmm.
So, with you being the immediate successor to Nocenti, I was wondering, and I don't even know if you can tell me if you know, is there a DG Chichester Daredevil omnibus on the horizon? Because currently, I mean, honestly, I mean, unless you have a Marvel Unlimited subscription
Right.
or you pick up the Epic collections,
Yep. Hmm.
you can't get these collected except for those Epic collections. I would love to see an omnibus of your Daredevil run, including Black Armor. So is that something you think could happen? Is that on the horizon at all?
I mean, Eric, I never thought Black Armor would happen. So, I mean, to me, that was
Sure.
like, what? I'm doing Daredevil again? Like I'm back in Hell's Kitchen? So I think anything can happen.
Mm,
There was a long time in that semi woe is me, period of time when I would look at comics, across that 20 years when I wasn't really doing anything in it. Um, where, I'd go into a comic store now and again, you'd see the collections on the shelf, and they had every Daredevil uh, paperback under the sun, oddly enough, except for the ones I had done, right? There was no, because there was a very nice collection of Last Rites. There was a very
mm,
nice collection of Fall from Grace done. Um, and you could, after the initial publication, you could never find them. And, and, and their stories I know resonated with people. I know that those were things that definitely, connected with some people. Um, but I always would like, well, what did I do wrong? What did I, who did I piss off? Um, so, it's possible. I mean, that they might, want to collect it. I think, I mean, I know I've done good work. I know I also stumbled a few times on, the way I executed certain things. If I could go back and slap that version of me in the side of the head and,
mm.
do this instead of that, that would be the closest I'd get to sort of having a regret or something. Um, but Anne's work is extraordinary. Anne is a phenomenal writer. Who explored um, really daring themes in Daredevil. And in other places. Very literate, very unexpected places. She took the character so I applaud the fact she has an omnibus. I think anything that's um, shining a spotlight on the work that she did with the character, which is well known anyway, but more power to it. If I was to get something going, I'd probably actually be the last to know. It's not like they sometimes keep you informed on these things. They
Sure.
they just make it happen, and then all of a sudden you're you either get a copy or sometimes you don't get a copy, of what they're putting together. So, but no, I'm not being coy. I know nothing about like
Okay.
anything along those lines.
Well, I hope it happens. I'll say
Me
that because
too.
I'd
Yeah,
love to
that'd be
add it
cool.
to my Daredevil section of my shelf.
Thank you.
Um, I appreciate you being humble, but I will say, Ann Nocenti, absolutely, she legendary.
Yeah.
But there's a reason that you had such a long run on Daredevil. So I
Oh,
just want to give you that.
yeah, no, thank you. I mean, like I said, I was very down on my work for a long time. Part of that is like mental whatever. But I've come to appreciate, there's a couple guys who, for whatever reason, they do a podcast that is um, they call it the Chichester chats, and I have no idea why they're masochists, I guess. They go back in and they review some of my stuff, every month or so. And
Mhm.
they forced me to go back and reread a lot of stuff, things I hadn't
Sure,
looked at in a long time. And that's been good. That's been good to sort of appreciate things that I, that didn't work at all. And then I'll go back and say, no, you know what, actually that's got a lot of good stuff going on in it. So it's good to revisit your past work, and I think I've always been very self-critical, but maybe too self-critical in that way. But I know there's a lot of really good moments that I can deliver on, and I think Black Armor then also shows that I've still got something going on. So
absolutely. Okay, well, since we are on a Batman show, I've got two
yeah,
quick
go
DC
with it.
questions for you, and then I want to talk about your current work really quickly. Um, so, seeing as we're a Batman show, is
Hmm.
Batman a character that you would be? And I know you've done Daredevil, so there those similarities, but ultimately they are very different characters.
Yes, yes.
Is Batman a character that you would be interested in writing?
Well, I think I was. I mean, again, if somebody was to call, but I would, there'd be no reason for them to expect that they would call, right? There's lots of
Right.
people who would do great jobs on Batman who have more history with the character. Um, but when I think back to that passion I had for the character, more, even more so as just an audience member, as a reader,
Hmm.
than as a creative person, you of course always run through your head your own personal what if, right? What if there was a Batman story here? What if there's a Batman story here, in your own mind? Just even as a kid, reading the comics, wow, it'd be cool if Batman did this, or, Batman went here. So I would certainly not never turn anything like that down, but
Sure.
also in fairness to the many talented people who've worked on Batman who have more cred in the sense, like I never pursued it either, right? The
Hmm.
point in time to pursue it, was probably again when Joe and I had a very good experience working together on that Huntress story. It's a short story, but Joe is a great editor and took time and care to navigate even the short story and make it better. And so that was no guarantee of future things, but I had a if not a shoe, at least a toe in the door of the Batman office, with
Hmm.
that. And I didn't really, work it. I didn't, hey Joe, if there's something else, let me know. It was sort of like assignment's done. I've got to go back to this advertising stuff that's now seemingly starting to occupy my time. Um,
Gotcha.
so but he's a tough character. He's even in the short instance of doing the Daredevil Batman story, Eye for an Eye, that we started off talking about. Um, I think if you do him right, he's a challenging character. A lot of character. It's easy to do a crap, shallow Batman story, but who wants that? There's a lot of those. Just as
Yeah.
you know, but Denny gave me some good guidance. Um, even in doing this, and obviously I knew Daredevil very well, but I tried to create the story that they got equal footing. And I think I mostly succeeded, not making it a Daredevil book with Batman in it, or overcompensating and making Batman uh, you know uh, overpowering, Daredevil. I try to give them a good back and forth, and I think I did succeed. But he's a very, uh, like I said, it's a complicated character, to my mind. The sides of the identity. If you really want to lean into, um, the detective angle of it, more so than just the brooding, vigilante, which I think is really intriguing. Um, one of the best Batman stories I've seen, in the last bunch of years, was actually the Batman work in the video games, the Arkham video games, if you played those at all. And
Yeah.
but I thought the way that they represented the character through that, and they were channeling obviously a lot of the great work done in comics, but I thought they struck a great balance of the the fighter, um, and the detective, and you were immersed in it as the player. So to me, those really, stood out as, if I ever went down a road to do that, I would like to do something like that.
Sounds a lot like Paul Dini. So I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
I
yeah,
would,
yeah,
I think I would
yeah.
like that.
Well, yeah, yeah, and like, yes, you can't go wrong, with that. That's like, yeah, that's a great North Star to have.
Very nice. Well, having said that, if it's Batman, that's a great answer. But if the DC pantheon is laid before you and they say,
Yep,
Dan, you can write anybody you want in the DC stable, who are you picking?
Green Lantern, and
Okay.
I would, and I say that, being friendly with Ron Mars and knowing Ron Mars did such great work on it. And but uh I that's one of those characters that always like spoke to me. I just love the visual of him. I love the attitude of him. I love the powers. I love the team ups with Green Arrow, and when Danny O'Neill and Neil Adams were doing those, really almost social, commentary, stories that they were doing, where the two of them were hitting the streets and exploring, what was going on in the world beyond just flying around and fighting supervillains. Um, so I just think it's a really interesting, like, character, and somebody, had said if I got to do another Marvel DC team up, I'd actually said that we're really interested to do Daredevil and Green Lantern,
Mm,
because there'd be something just about both in their own way, they were men without fear, right? But
mm.
there's different ways they sort of approach, things as well, and obviously the power, dynamics and such. But yeah, I think that would be a fun, character to play with. I don't know what I do with it. Obviously it's got a big, complicated, complex mythology with the
Sure.
background, and which Green Lantern would it be? To me, it's always Hal Jordan, but I know Hal
Hmm.
Jordan's gone through, a whole mishmash of things over the years. But yeah, I think that one. I mean, my favorite DC character growing up was probably the Phantom Stranger, but that character, you never knew what the hell that character was, really. Guy with a weird hat, and you can't really see his
I
eyes in a cape.
I
But
appreciate the answer. That is a deep pull I didn't expect. So Phantom Stranger, there we go.
but it's like, but I would, it's like just one of those characters. I don't know why the hell it appealed to me, but it was just like, oh, okay, he did for whatever reason, because
Well, he looks amazing.
he
So
looks amazing, yeah, and
yeah.
Jim Aparo did a lot of that work, and probably that stuck out in my head, and he had a sort of Twilight Zone vibe, and I was a big Twilight Zone fan, so, um, but and there were a couple Batman, Phantom Stranger stories I remember, enjoying a lot, but yeah, I'm not waiting on DC to call, but if they do, I've got a few ideas.
I love it. Well, until that call,
Yes,
you do have some work going on now. You
I
did
do.
send me some preview copies. You sent me the first issues of Axel's Infernal
Yep.
and Risk. I think I'm pronouncing it is Risk,
Yes, it
correct?
is Risk. It's straight up Risk. Yep.
Okay. So, and one of them is a Kickstarter book
Yep.
and the other is with Black Box Comics. I
Yep.
read both issues. I really enjoyed them. They're wildly different stories.
They are.
One is kind of in the occult and the supernatural, and the other is, I don't know that you would call it a dystopian future, but RYSK is very, there was a sickness that caused these people to lose limbs and different body parts, and they were retrofitted basically with these techno pieces to live
Right.
on. So tell me a little bit about both of these books, and where everybody can find them, and how we can support you with Axel's Infernal and RYSK.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thanks for bringing them both up and checking them out. And I'm glad it sounds like you enjoyed them,
I did.
so that's good to know because I don't want them to be vanity projects. So Axel's Infernal, as you said, is a Kickstarter book. The one I sent you is issue one.
Mhm.
Issue two is actually in uh, pre-launch right now. We haven't launched it yet. I'm trying to get the attention around it, so that when you get the actual funding activity going, we hope to get over our funding goal by having enough attention. I don't want to do it when there's 10 people aware of it. But it is a supernatural story. I kind of think of it as like an almost supernatural grindhouse. It's got a rip roaring watch it at the drive-in sort of quality to it, where a woman named Percy Cross is hijacked into the service of something called the Underworld Transportation Authority. And they are essentially the service that delivers not just one hell to Earth, but many hells to Earth. Like
Mm.
every culture almost across history has a version of hell, all of which are not just Dante's Inferno. So they're all competing for awareness and attention, and they are want their hell brought to Earth so that more people will believe in them. So Percy is shanghaied into this, and the first issue is a lot of her getting disoriented, getting set up with what's going on. Issue two really gets into that mythology a lot more. So it's the issues all illustrated by Carl Waller. Looks great, reads great because I wrote it, and and we've begun to get it colored and lettered, but we're holding off on a couple of things until we get to the funding. But there'll be the usual kind of rewards. Folks
Mhm.
can get multiple issues, autographed issues, issues with the script, digital copies, original artwork. I'm looking at maybe some metal trading cards that somebody said, a lot of folks are kind of into. Can't quite go down the pervy, not safe for work covers myself, although I know those do very well. But
Gotcha.
but if you
And
go to,
can they
go
still
ahead.
get issue one?
Yes, issue one will
Okay,
be part of the rewards package. So
perfect.
if folks go to either Axel's Infernal, AXLESINFERNAL.com, that's its own standalone website, which will take you to the pre-launch site on Kickstarter as well. You can watch a trailer, you can see some of the artwork from number two, get yourself excited about it. And if you would sign up on the Kickstarter pre-launch, you're not committing to anything yet, but it will show us we've got some interest going. So I would really appreciate if folks would check that out. And if you do like what you see, pass it around to more people. Um,
Absolutely.
RYSK was the twofer at that summer of Black Armor. So when CB Sobolski stepped away from the table, Dimitrios Zaharakis, who is the publisher of Black Box Comics, stepped up, and we had met years before when he started the line. He had kind of brought Scott McDaniel, my partner from Daredevil, on,
Hmm.
but I was even more deeply involved in advertising at that point. Kind of ghosted him a little bit to my chagrin, and but he was good enough to sort of reach out again in person, and we hit it off. And he pitched uh, the beginnings of what would become RYSK. He had this idea of a bookie with some kind of telepathic power who can sort of see the angles on things, and she gets involved with a heist of some kind, and adventures ensue. So he comes up with these strange angles. Like a bookie is not my first thought of, a main character. But I realized that's sort of his genius is he'll give you this and he'll let you run with it. So I percolated that a little bit, and it became um, this cyber future. right?
Hmm.
Where, this, as you said, you summed it up very nicely. The world's had a disaster. Folks have had to kind of augment themselves to sort of just retain physical mobility and some forms of appearance. Um, as part of that, though, our main character, Ruby Chance, who is that odds maker, who is that bookie, um, gets an extra something. She gets this persona, an AI persona, if you will, in her head called RYSK. And RYSK gives Ruby an edge, gives her the ability to really see situations from every possible strategic angle and can even enhance her autonomic nervous system, so she can control her breathing, control her adrenaline in different ways to again give her a physical edge on things. So she will get involved in a heist. She'll get pulled into something in the next several issues. It's a 5-issue series, and we'll find out that the heist. This is not a spoiler necessarily. Is not what it's made out to be, and there will be more adventure going on with that, with her and her crew that she has around her, the other odds makers that are in her sort of bookie team. So it was a fun book to develop an entire world around, and it did sort of start off very dystopian. I mean, if you read the original script, it's a lot, I think, grittier in tone, but
Hmm.
Mannix Francisco uh, took a different approach to the visuals. So it's very sleek, it's very cyber, like stylized, I would say. And
Beautiful
um,
art.
and it, yeah, and it looks great, so I don't care.
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm not going to go back to Demetrius and say, but it was supposed to be gritty. That's the collaborative part of comics. The
Yeah.
story's there. Like you said, the art's really great. The storytelling is there. And so to me, that's what he was inspired by on the page. He brought it to life in his way. And that still allowed us to tell the same story. It just has actually, I think ultimately what's going to be a somewhat more hopeful, um, like sort of vibe around the whole thing. I'm a little
Hmm.
sick of dystopias, straight up dystopias myself.
Yes.
And so this, I think, gives, her a kick and the storyline a kick I mean, it's a bit of a crap world, right, that they're in right now. There's still a lot of danger and rebuilding from that disaster you brought up. But I think that the direction of it becomes more energized because of the way he approached the art. And even though I wrote it full script, as as I began to see it, what he was doing early on, and I was still working, say, on the back half of the last issues. I think it did affect my approach, my mental attitude around it. So, maybe have changed up some of the dialogue in doing that. So if it comes out actually this Wednesday, in just 2 days from now, as we're recording this, which will be the 23rd. And as I said, it's a 5-issue series. If your local comic shop has not ordered it, ask them about it. But if you want to jump on blackboxcomics.net, you can actually order it directly from them as well. So, check it out, leave a review, get the word out about it. I think it's a good ride.
Well, we're definitely going to back you here at TFR. I want as many people to check these out as they can. We're going to have those links that Dan mentioned
Thank you.
in the description of this show. And I want to say, there's for the longest time it was just superheroes. That was the comics I read, and Scott Snyder's American Vampire. When I first read that, that's kind of the first one that pulled me out of okay. I can read other comics. There are a lot of other good, realms out there. I got the same kind of feeling with both of these books. So,
Good. Good.
yeah.
That's I'll take that comparison. Scott Snyder, sure, I'll go with
Yeah. So
that.
definitely two worlds I'm very interested in continuing to read. So we're going to link those. Go check out Dan's current work and support him as much as possible. Dan, I met you at GalaxyCon Richmond. Are you regularly on the con circuit? Where are you going to be coming up?
Um, I was pretty busy last year until my wife had a bit of an accident, which she's fine, but it was kind of derailed the last couple. So Richmond was the first one after the last couple of shows of last year got derailed, I have a pretty good relationship with the GalaxyCon guys. I'm hoping I'll get invited to a couple more, but nothing's confirmed except for Dragon Con, which is Labor Day weekend. So I'll definitely be at Dragon Con, and I might be at Terrificon in Connecticut, which is again in my backyard, sort of. So I might be able to get an invitation to that. But right now, Dragon
Okay.
Con's the only confirmation. But if folks are interested, my newsletter, which is storymaze.substack.com, one more link to add. I will definitely use that, as a platform to say, hey,
Hmm.
this came up, this show came up, I'll be here. So that's a good way to keep track of where I'm going to be.
Yeah, for sure. If you send me that link, I will definitely pop it in
Totally.
there.
Thank you,
Dan.
sir.
Well, I want to be respectful of your time. I so appreciate you coming on and discussing all things Batman and Daredevil and RYSK and Axel's Infernal and everything else. So I'd like you to let everybody know where they can find you on social media, and then I'm going to get you out of here for the evening, Dan.
Totally. No, it's been a great conversation. I am simply DG Chichester everywhere. So, I got in early. I got the monopoly on my name. So, you can check me out on Twitter, on Bluesky, on, Threads, Instagram. So, I'm regularly popping in and out of there with, one thing or another. So, hit me up, check out what I'm doing, say hi.
Fantastic. Well, go say hi to Dan on social media. Go see him at a con if he's there. But Dan, thank you so much for your time. We're going to get you out of here, but I hope you have a great evening, man.
Same to you, Eric. Thanks again. Take care.
Okay, guys, there you have it. Our interview with DG Dan Chichester. I so appreciate Dan coming on the show and giving us so much time and just being so welcoming. As we said in the interview and before, we had done with myself and Ryan Lauer on the Batman Book Club, had covered Daredevil and Batman. And then that got noticed online by Dan Chichester. He reached out to Ryan. He got on that episode of the Batman Book Club after mine. And then he just happened to be in my local area at GalaxyCon Richmond. I met him there. I couldn't pass up the opportunity after those episodes to go and meet him. It was a great experience, and it was a wonderful experience interviewing him for the show. Mr. Chichester was so giving with time and information, and I think it was a great interview. I really hope you guys enjoy it. Please make sure you go and check out the links in the description of the show for Axel's Infernal, as well as RYSK and Black Box Comics. Go check those out and support DG Chichester as you support us as well. But we'd like to thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I can't wait to hear some feedback on our interview with Dan. So make sure you let us know what you thought of that interview and this episode. But that's going to do it for this episode of TFR. Thank you guys so much again for the support as always. If you'd like to connect with the show, again, like I said at the top, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, X, Threads, and Bluesky. That's at tfrbatpod. My personal accounts can be found across those social medias at mecarter89. That's mecarter89. If you're looking for a way to support the show, the best and easiest way to do that is to leave us a rating and review on any podcast platform you listen to us on. If you'd like to leave us a written review on Apple Podcasts, we do read those on the show. If you're looking for another way to support us, and we don't ask that you spend a dime on this show, but if you'd like to, you can go to redbubble.com and search Shop TFR, all one word, and you'll find our logos created by Justin Kowalski on all kinds of cool merch. Our theme song was composed by the very talented Gaurav Venkateswar, and his music can be found at gvtunes.com. Make sure you go to the link in the description of this podcast. Go visit Organic Price Books, use our promo codes, save yourself some money as you do some shopping, and support TFR as you do so. But that's going to do it for this episode of The Fire Rises. Thank you guys so much once again for the support and for listening. We'll see you next time, but until then, make sure you keep that bat signal lit and pointed skyward. Batman was created by Bill Finger and Bob Kane and is the sole property of Warner Bros. Discovery. The Fire Rises, a Batman podcast, is in no way associated with DC Comics, DC Studios, or Warner Bros. Discovery. The thoughts and opinions of the participants of this show are their own and do not reflect the companies that they work for. Thank you for listening. We'll see you on the next episode.